and we're reading Crabbe by William Bell. It's kind of an embarrassing it's kind of embarrassing to admit this now, but you've probably already noticed that when I set out on my escape, I had no idea where I was going. And I had no map or compass, which was logical in a way because I didn't know how to use either anyways. But at the time I didn't know there was anything wrong or crazy in what I was doing. If I'd thought about it, I'd have figured it was pretty simple. For example, you go down a river, across a lake, throw in a few portages, and when you want to come home, you just retrace your route. Easy, right? Wrong. When you recross, say, a lake from the opposite direction, especially after a day or so, it looks like a different lake altogether. Everything, shoreline, shape of islands, looks different. So, map and compass are essential. But the thing about someone who's escaping is this: he's more concerned about what he's leaving than what he's going to. I was lost from the time I left Ithaca camp. And what was worse, I didn't know I was lost. So on I went that afternoon looking for the river mouth where my father and I had gone fishing and long ago summer. It took a while to find it because there were several small bays at the end of the lake. It was shallow, about 2 canoe lengths wide, and had almost no current. It was getting dusk by now, the air taking on a chilly dampness. I could see quick, dark birds darting along the water's surface, and also sorts of chirps and clunks were coming from the grasses in the bay. I had decided to camp there and get an early start in the morning. There was a small campsite at the river mouth, so I headed for it, the marsh grass whispering as the canoe parted it. The shore was flat and the campsite was canopied and surrounded by dark evergreens. By the time I was up, it was almost dark. I went down to the shoreline to eat a can of cold pork and beans and look over the narrow bay. You know, people say the darkness falls, but it doesn't. I don't know how many times I've read that sentence. I do a lot of reading. Darkness fell. But as I watched the shore, which was covered with dense evergreens and odd silver birch, I realized that darkness seems to rise up from the floor of the forest. And as the sun sinks, the light seems to come up the trunks as if to escape the blackness that wells up from the earth. Soon only a few stars shone weakly, then disappeared behind the clouds that were moving in fast on the breeze. I don't know how long I sat there, it was quite a while, before I noticed something else that surprised me. The forest was noisy at night. What's all this stuff about quiet nighttime wood? I couldn't hear the breeze in the spruce branches. I could hear the breeze in the spruce branches, a loon laughing out on the lake, rustles, chirps, frog thunks, and other noises I didn't recognize. And I'll tell you, after a while, it got to me. I didn't feel so good. It was very dark, so dark that I could barely see the calm surface of the bay, protected by the trees from the night breeze, and the damp air chilled like a wet coat. I began to imagine all kinds of threatening sources for the noises I couldn't identify, like insane killers who would invade my campsite and knife me with huge curved blades, or another bear seeking to chew me up, or the same bear come back to finish the job. Loneliness crept closer with each long, lonely ow of the loon. Another crab anxiety attack was on me, and not the kind I was used to. This was the same dread I had felt a few minutes before the bear came. I got up and headed for the tent and my down womb. God, I wanted to talk to my old buddy, Silent Sam. The shivers that chilled me were not from the cold. It was a long, fearful night. The kind that's supposed to build character but really just makes you want to drink and a sensible answer to the question, what the hell am I doing here? Or in the world, for that matter. It wasn't my first lonely night, I can tell you, but it had been a long time since I'd cried and a long time since Sam was able to convince me that I didn't really need anybody. There isn't much to tell about the next day. I got up as soon as I saw, gratefully, dawn's rosy fingers creeping over the horizon. The river travel was uneventful. I found a campsite on a small island that was much less gloomy than the last night's, but it rained, and the plop and platter of drops on the fly increased my loneliness. I was also getting really jumpy. I have to admit, Sam's absence had a lot to do with that. The night that night was the first time I seriously considered going home. I guess I got some sleep, but not much. It's funny how the weather affects you when you're living outdoors, though. A sunny day greeted me. It was warm with a light breeze. The murmur of the river was background music to birdsong. I felt full of confidence. What the hell? So I had a few bad nights. I had a lot of those at home. So after a continental breakfast of cold instant coffee and a couple of handfuls of Cheerios, intrepid Crab launched his loyal craft into the bosom of whatever river it was. For the first time, while I practiced my rudder technique, letting the current move me, which it did at a brisk rate, it seemed, it was like traveling down an artery at times because the forest came right to the edge of the water. Here, the river was only about 20 feet wide and fairly deep. Occasionally, it would widen, trees would give way to a beaver pond. I saw a moose in one of these, staring at me with her long, stupid face, with weeds and whitish bulbs hanging dripping from her lips. Sometimes those bulbs that looked sort of like blueberry bushes lined the river. Those bushes that look sort of like blueberry bushes line the river. If you were a science buff, which I wasn't then, You'd have had fits of delight over the variety of bushes and birds and stuff. Until you begin to hit the portages, that is. I began to encounter them around noon after I stopped for a munch. They were there to skirt the numerous little falls and rapids that started to show up. Although almost all the carryovers were short, none over 100 yards, they were difficult as hell, all mucky, strewn with boulders, sometimes pushing straight up an embankment and back down again a little further on. I had to make 3 trips per portage. So after a couple of hours, I lost my patience and all of my appreciation for the so called beauties of nature. Some of the falls were really pretty, all laced with white foam, but at the time I hardly looked at them, just pressed on like a machine. I got so groaned every time I heard the sound of fast moving water in the distance, a sound almost exactly like the wind in the treetops. I guess bone weariness mostly explains what happened. I wasn't paying too much attention to what I was doing, and I was so whacked out I probably couldn't have gotten out of the mess anyway. What happened was this. I just pushed off from the portage that ended below a chute of very fast, wicked looking water that snarled through a rock cut, tossing foam into the air. It wasn't registering with me that this river was getting quite a bit quicker and more treacherous, deeper and wider, and as I struggled along, heavy packs or trying to keep the canoe straight in the swift current. Anyway, I started off again, and about 50 yards downstream from the portage was an almost right angled bend in the river. I could hear loud roaring and figured it was rapids behind me. Off I went, too tired to paddle, just steering. Then I noticed 2 things. I began to speed up, and the river bottom seemed to leap toward me as it got shallow very quickly, so shallow I couldn't paddle even if I wanted to. I went lickety split into that turn, and when I got into it, the patented crab paddling method failed me. The canoe began to revolve, and the next thing I knew, I was between 2 rock walls, going like hell backward down a fast chute, noise of water thundering in my ears. Sounds funny, doesn't it, if you picture it? But when I turned around to look over my shoulder down the river, my heart stopped. The the rock canyon I was trapped in narrowed quickly, like a long funnel to the end where 2 giant boulders squeezed the foaming river to no more than a canoe length in width. And there the water just disappeared. I was confused for about 5 seconds. Then I got close enough to be shrouded in mist, spray, and the hellish roar of a falls. Over I went, and as I was suspended for a split second in midair, you know what I thought? I thought, Christ, Crab, I'll bet you look ridiculous. Can you even believe it? For that microsecond, before the very likely death, I felt embarrassed. But I didn't have time to blush. The stern of the canoe dropped crashing into a boulder just beneath the surface of the water. Walls and ceilings of water smashed down on me. The packs rolled onto me, propelled by the rushing water, pounding the breath out of me. One of them bashed my arm against a gunwale, and I felt a searing pain as the buckle slashed my forearm open. A second pack came square against my face and knocked me backwards into the pandemonium of leaping water. Then, as they say in the whodunits, everything went black. But that was just the beginning. 2 things, impressions. I remember darkness and cold. I felt darkness and cold. Everybody has. But this wasn't the same. The dark was a dead, chilling liquid, and it was like I was slowly sinking into it, and it flowed into my ears and my nose and my mouth and filled me and dissolved me in the blackness. Cold is always white or blue, and it pinches you, but this cold was like blackness. It invaded me, crept to the center, congealed like black slush. It took me over, turning my bones to dark ice. And all the while, this sinking, forever down and down, there was no fear, strangely enough, just the feeling that I had gone away. Then the sinking stopped. The cold and darkness began to recede. Then, this is a little embarrassing, I had an erotic dream. A graceful woman walked naked from the sea and lay down with me, holding me firmly in her arms. She melted the cold away, now embracing me from the front, now from the back, and I could feel her life warmth on my naked skin. Soon she went away, taking the darkness with her, and I lay in a warm cocoon. I opened my eyes eventually, and there above me was the most beautiful face I'd ever seen.